in my first lecture is really go through some critical concepts. Right? If you find it a bit too heavy, don't worry. If you get confused, that's even a better sign, because then you will try to find out and get yourself cleared about these things. But it seems to me it's extremely important for us to go through this. So my first lecture is what I call trajectories of accumulation, the development discourse in the periphery. Periphery meaning the countries of the south, the formerly colonized countries, one form of another. Centers means the North America and the North, the countries of the North, Europe and so on. I'll make a brief presentation of the capitalist production process and the equation and the meaning of accumulation. Because today in Africa, we are talking about the character of the societies and economies. They are all capitalist. Okay? If anyone of you want to challenge it, we can later discuss it. But they're basically all capitalist. And number one. Number two, they are all integrated in the world capitalist system. But today, the capitalist system that exists is a world capitalist system. Alright? So that's why it's very important for us to understand what is the underlying logic of the capitalist system. Then I'll discuss that as it is clear, force of extraction, accumulation, historicizing accumulation, long durée. History is extremely important. Those who say that history is outdated, we should deal with the present. You cannot deal with the present without dealing with history. The present was not just born. The present was born of the past. It's extremely important for us to situate these things in history. And today, we are in the new phase of capitalism, which is variously called neoliberalism. And we are undergoing new forms of capitalist accumulation. Land grabbing is one of the examples. So we will deal with that. Now, two forms of accumulation, extraction of surplus. First, just to give you a quick insight into the meaning of accumulation. Accumulation lies at the heart of the capitalist system. Capitalist system is based on accumulate. That is the alpha and omega of the capitalist system. What do we mean by accumulation? If you look in the abstract and the capitalist process and the way it presents itself, you start with money, or what you call those who are investing, right? Because of investment, they come with money. Okay? At the moment, we are not asking you anything. The investor got the money from, that will come later. You start with money. So what does the investor do? For example, he or she wants to put up a shirt factory. So, with certain amount of money, which is called capital, actually it's not capital, it's money. You will rent land, premises, right, or build them. You will put machinery, okay, and you will hire labor, right? So, you use that money to buy C. Okay, C here refers to constant capital, and V, variable capital, which is hiring labor. Okay? The correct term for it is when you hire a person to work for you, you are not hiring the person, you are hiring her capacity, his capacity to work for you for the number of hours. That capacity to work is called labor power. So if I hire you for 8 hours, okay, you are supposed to work for me for 8 hours. But how I use your labor to use 8 hours depends on me. Whether you are put on a very fast assembly line or slow assembly line, to intensify that labor depends on me. Now, where did the original capital come from? Historically speaking. And that is where the concept of primitive accumulation comes in. The original capital came from by robbing resources by robbing people, okay? By robbing the countries of the south, the peripheries of their treasures. All right? Take example of US. When there was immigration from the European countries, from Britain to the US, there are people living there, to the Raza, right? Those people were killed. I don't know, in my time you used to see these American movies of the Wild West, you know, the Tarzan and the Red Indians, right? Yeah. And they fight, you know. Those people were destroyed. The first genocide in history. Whole civilizations were destroyed. In Africa, the first encounter was similar. I'll say more about it. So this was primitive accumulation, according to Marx's political economy. Original. After having this primitive accumulation, then now the process launches itself on expanded reproduction. The meaning primitive here is original accumulation. Now my argument is that primitive accumulation continues throughout the process of development of world capitalism. So two process of accumulation, primitive, which is by expropriation of resources and labor, etc., and accumulation by appropriation of surplus value. The two processes, primitive accumulation and accumulation by expansion, continue throughout the history of capitalism to this day. Okay, in different forms and in different times. At some time one is dominant over the other. But the two processes, in other primitive accumulation was not simply original, it continues. So, how do you extract surplus? Through these two processes, by expropriation and by appropriation. By expropriation means robbing, by appropriation means producing surplus value through producing commodities. Appropriation at the pole of accumulation gives rise to expanded reproduction. I just explained to you, right? Expanded reproduction, the second cycle. And expropriation is what I have called primitive accumulation. This is the pole of accumulation, this is the pole of surplus extraction. Now in between these two poles lie various mediations and mechanisms of expropriating the surplus. The mediators between this process being the state itself involved in extracting surplus, by the market, so market forces, by force, by volition, even voluntary, because you're part of a system. So in between, you get what we call different fractions of capital. We name them: merchant capital, state capital, rentier capital, financial capital, and so on. Investigation of these specifics, these specificities, allow us to characterize the social formation and help us answer the big questions. And these are the important questions when you are doing your research, when you are trying to understand a social formation. Who produces surplus? Who are the producers of surplus? Who appropriates surplus? So produced. And what form of appropriation it takes. They are very fundamental questions. And whatever you are investigating, unless you are aware of and contextualize with this big picture, with this big theoretical framework, okay, you don't get right answers. Because as you know, whatever data you gather, data never speak for themselves, right? You make them speak. And how do you make them speak? You make them speak through certain conceptual framework. If you want to understand primitive accumulation process over a long period of time, the important point is that primitive accumulation cuts into necessary consumption. That is an important point that I would like to explain. Take, for example, peasant production. The way it is presented is that peasant production has low productivity, it does not produce surplus, all right, and then we cannot develop because there is no investment back into that. This is the standard story, right? But how come this peasant producer, who is non-productive, does not produce surplus, is the most exploited under capitalist system? Is the most exploited. Where does the capital, where does the surplus extracted from the peasant come from? This is a peasant who is probably using back-breaking hoe to cultivate. Okay. This is a peasant who uses all family labor, including women's labor and children's labor, to produce. Gets a bit of subsistence and sells something, and yet it's the most exploited. How come it's most exploited? Most exploited because capital cuts into necessary consumption of the peasant. So even that is necessary for the peasant to reproduce herself. Okay? Capital cuts into it. And that is where you find while peasants exert superhuman labor, they live subhuman lives. They are most malnourished, they are the most hardworking, they are the most exploited by capital. Now, quickly, historical such accumulation for long duration. We are talking about 5 centuries for the development of capitalism, of capitalist pillage. Slave trade. In Africa, we do not have to say more about it. We know, right? This was a robbery of human beings themselves, right? To go and work on the plantations in the US, in the Caribbean, producing commodities going to the north. It's very interesting that during the 15th century, almost close to each other, Columbus lands in San Domingo in 1492. That starts the process of immigration, okay? And Vasco da Gama rounds the Cape of Good Hope in 1498. Here in Tanzania, we have a place called Kilwa. Unfortunately, you don't have time, otherwise you should have visited it. Okay. Kilwa was a flourishing civilization. Vasco da Gama came around, okay, they are dealing with trade and gold and so on, and bombarded the place. That's how they established themselves along the coast. Under colonialism, you have both classical primitive accumulation, grabbing of land, right? First, you grab people, they become slaves, they become commodities, to be sold and bought, right? Under colonialism, you grab land now and resources. On which you make people work. That is primitive accumulation, land grabbing. In settler economies, what would they do? They simply took our land, right? Declared, what? Was it 30% of the land which belonged to the whites, right? How was that land taken? Of course, use of force. That's primitive accumulation. And then you have other forms of colonization. Those who come from East Africa, and even Rwanda, you know the system of migrant labor, right? In Tanzania, we call it Mananga system. This is the labor which is recruited from the countryside. Male labor, adult labor, which goes to work on plantations and mines. Okay? For a period of say 9 months. After 9 months, they go back. Meanwhile, at home, the woman becomes a peasant, producing food and maintaining the family. So, the man is semi-colonized, the woman is peasantized. So today when you see the division of labor, it was developed historically in the colonials. In Tanganyika we call this system Manamba system. Manamba because these people who recruited were identified by number, not name. So plural of number, Namba, is Manamba. Kenyan said it, Uganda said it, Rwanda said it, okay. But actually if you examine it, all of them, the various policy measures they adopted was to try to install accumulation by expansion, impulse of industrialization, raising the wages of the migrant labor, actually abolishing the migrant system, okay, and so on. These are all attempts to install accumulation by expansion, the so-called classical capitalist process. Today in Tanzania, more people are employed in domestic service than in the mining sector. Okay? So much for employment. And the fastest growing sector is financial sector. Suddenly you found mushrooming of banks and financial institutions. I often drive from the place I stay to go to university. That road at one time, there was hardly anything. Now you look left and right, so many banks. If we are supposed to be a poor country, what are all these banks doing here? And they're most liquid. But then of course we can't give loans, we don't give loans because we are not loanable. Where does the money come from? All the deposits are made in the bank. Where does it come from? From this poor country. And that's one of the fastest growing sectors. Privatization, commodification of public goods. What used to be the public sector, not a commodity, education, health, water, sanitation, all these become privatized. The term the commodities to be bought and sold. Education you have to buy, health you have to buy, water you have to buy, electricity you have to buy. Including your forests, the fauna and animals, everything becomes a commodity. Very soon we will have oxygen put in cylinders, so all of us take oxygen and buy it so against pollution. Clean air. Outline of some alternative, it seems to me that we must understand fundamentally that if you are talking about alternative, you have to change the logic of accumulation. Currently, how accumulation takes? Of course, in a schematic sense. From the periphery, which are sites of surplus extraction production, surplus is siphoned off and accumulated in the centers. So centers are the sites of accumulation, periphery becomes a site of surplus production and extraction. Broadly speaking. And then you get so-called capital now, coming from the north, seeking new sites of investment and extraction. So that is very briefly talking about the agrarian question. I just wanted to flag it at this stage so that you keep it in mind, because for me the agrarian question is a land question and the present question. When you talk about land tenure and land reform, I will refer you back to this. Let me end here. If you have any questions or comments, we can discuss them.
The question is, so how can we prevent this undue capital accumulation? Using what instruments can we achieve equitable development in the society? I mean, what are the instruments to prevent the pervasive effects of capital accumulation? That's my question.
Just adding to what he asked, one of the alternatives that you shared around trying to dismantle the primitive accumulation was public ownership of critical sectors like finance, telecommunication, among others. And I would be keen to hear from you, especially within the African continent, within our countries, any particular country that we can reference to that has made attempts in trying to dismantle this primitive accumulation.
I'm in a dilemma looking at the current movements and the way power of capitalism is. I had an opportunity to read the book by Issa Shivji, The Winner Takes All, and looking on how China is taking place and accumulating almost everywhere on the natural resources. And now we are trying to link and try to go back to our roots, taking into account all those dynamics in your feelings and perception, looking at all these alternatives. How possible is it now, like Tanzania, trying to be an example of other African countries and the rest of the list or the developing countries as the so-called?
I'm glad actually that all of you raised extremely relevant questions. And most of them around how do we get out of this? How do we get out of this? Because 50 years of independence is not a short period. I tend to always say, 50 years. No, 50 years is not a short period. No agriculture anywhere in the world can develop without credit. Okay? But there is no way a smallholder can get credit from banks, from commercial banks. No way, no, it does not happen anywhere. So, to transcend the urban-rural divide, it cannot be done through market forces. Because market will reinforce the divide, right? No private investor will go and, for example, start a processing factory in a village. Okay? Because the private investor looks at profit, right? Infrastructure is in the urban areas. Energy is in the urban areas. So obviously, okay, why should he or she go and invest in a village? There's no reason. That can only be done through the state which has a region, right? It cannot be left to the market, obviously.